A giant horse, straining against a heavy cart, walked alone across the empty plains. It was a sight that would make any man pause. But what the lonely cowboy who found it discovered inside that cart would not just make him pause, it would make him weep. This is their story. Elias Thorne was a man who spoke the language of ghosts. He saw them in the heat haze shimmering off the dry earth, heard them in the lonely cry of a hawk circling high above. 5 years ago, he had been a cavalryman with a future, a husband with a loving wife named Sarah, and the proud, expectant father of a baby girl. Then came the raid. A brutal, chaotic whirlwind of fire and violence that had consumed his small homestead and, he believed, his entire world. He had survived, but his soul had perished in the flames, leaving him to wander the territories. A man haunted by a silence where laughter used to be. He was riding through the barren stretch of the Comancheria, a land as empty as his own heart, when he saw it. It was a sight so strange, so out of place, that he initially thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat and his own grief-addled mind. A massive, powerful black horse, harnessed to a heavy, weathered-covered wagon, was moving slowly, stubbornly, across the desolate landscape. But there was no driver, no outriders, no other sign of life. Just the lone horse, straining against its load, pulling the heavy cart through the dust, one agonizing step at a time. His soldier's instincts screamed that this was a trap, an ambush. But his horseman's eye saw something else. He saw the deep, shuddering breaths of the great horse, the way its powerful muscles trembled with exhaustion. This was not a trap. This was a mission. The animal was not wandering aimlessly. It was going somewhere, driven by a purpose so strong it defied all logic. Curiosity, an emotion Elias had not felt in years, warred with his ingrained caution. He decided to follow, keeping a safe distance, a silent observer to this impossible, lonely procession. For an hour he followed, the strange spectacle unchanging. The horse, which he could now see, was a magnificent Shire cross he named Guardian. In his mind, never faltered. It simply walked, its great head bowed, its focus absolute. As Elias drew a little closer, carried by the wind, he heard it. This was the first hint, the first note in a song that would shatter his world. It was a sound that did not belong in this harsh, empty land. It was the sound of singing. It was a lullaby, faint and soft, a melody so gentle and sad it seemed to be absorbed by the vast, lonely sky. The voice was that of a child. Elias reined in his horse, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. A child? Alone out here? He urged his horse forward, his caution now replaced by a growing, urgent sense of dread. The lullaby grew stronger as he approached, and he realized with a jolt that the melody was familiar, hauntingly familiar. It was the same lullaby his own Sarah used to hum as she worked, a song passed down through her family for generations. The sound, a ghost from his past, struck him with the force of a physical blow. How was this possible? What devil's magic was this? He spurred his horse into a gallop, no longer a cautious observer, but a man hurtling towards a truth he was not prepared to face. As Elias galloped closer, the giant black horse, Guardian, finally brought the heavy wagon to a halt. It stood, its massive body trembling with an exhaustion so profound it seemed a miracle it was still on its feet. Its flanks were heaving, its powerful muscles quivering, but its head was held high, its dark, intelligent eyes fixed on Elias, not with aggression, but with a deep, unwavering vigilance. It was not just a horse. It was a sentinel, standing guard over the precious, silent cargo it had pulled across the unforgiving plains. Elias dismounted, his own horse sensing the strange, solemn energy of the scene and remaining still. He held his hands up, open and empty, a universal sign of peace. He did not approach the wagon. He approached the horse. He saw the dried foam on its muzzle, the raw, chafed skin where the heavy harness had rubbed against its powerful shoulders. He saw not a beast of burden, but a fellow soldier at the end of a long, brutal campaign. He spoke, his voice a low, rough murmur, the gentle tone a horseman uses to soothe a frightened animal. He told Guardian that his journey was over, that he had done well, that he was a good, brave horse. He slowly unbuckled the heavy leather straps of the harness, his movements calm and deliberate. The horse watched his every move, its ears twitching, but it did not pull away. With a final, heavy groan of leather and metal, the harness fell away, freeing the horse from its immense load. The great stallion did not run. It simply stood for a moment, then took a few, shaky steps towards the meager patch of grass by the side of the trail and began to graze. Its focus still half on the man, half on the wagon it had so loyally protected. Elias then went to his own saddlebags and retrieved his water skin, pouring the cool, precious liquid into his hat and offering it to the thirsty animal. This entire ritual was a calculated act of respect. In the unwritten code of the West, a man's horse was an extension of himself. By caring for the horse first, by showing it kindness and honor, Elias was sending a silent message to whoever was inside the wagon. I am not a threat. I understand loyalty. I am a friend. He spent nearly an hour with the horse, checking its hooves for stones, rubbing down its sweat-caked coat with handfuls of dry grass. All the while, the wagon remained silent. The child's lullaby did not return. A new, more chilling possibility began to form in Elias's mind. Perhaps the child was not alone. Perhaps someone was inside, injured, or worse. The silence from the wagon was no longer just mysterious. It was becoming ominous. Only after he was sure the horse was comfortable and calm did he finally turn his attention to the heavy, weathered cart and the heartbreaking secret it held within. With the horse now calmly grazing nearby, a fragile truce established, Elias turned to face the silent wagon. The air grew still, the vast emptiness of the prairie pressing in on him. The child's song, which had drawn him here, was gone, leaving a void that felt heavier and more foreboding than any sound. He was a man who had made a career of facing death on the battlefield, but a profound, paternal dread, an instinct he thought long buried, made his own hand tremble as he reached for the canvas flap. He pulled it back. The inside of the wagon was dark and stuffy, filled with the faint, sweet smell of hay and the heavier, metallic scent of sickness and sorrow. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the dim light. At first, he saw only a jumble of worn blankets and meager possessions. Then, he saw them. A woman was lying on a makeshift bed in the back, her face pale and still in the shadows. She was young, her features fine and drawn with a terrible exhaustion. It was clear from her stillness, from the waxy pallor of her skin, that her journey was over. She was gone. Elias's heart, a thing he thought had turned to stone, clenched with a familiar, aching pain. He had seen too much of this in his life, the quiet, final surrender to a world that was simply too hard. But it was what he saw next that stopped his breath. Nestled beside the woman, wrapped tightly in a clean wool blanket, was a small child. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, with tangled dark hair and wide, dark eyes that stared back at him. She was not crying. She was not afraid. She simply sat, a silent, solemn little sentinel, watching over her sleeping mother, her expression a heartbreaking mixture of childhood innocence and an ancient, weary grief. He saw the remnants of their life on the trail, a half-empty water skin, a single, gnawed-on piece of hardtack biscuit placed near the child's hand, a worn-out storybook. He pieced together the silent, tragic story. The mother, knowing she was dying, had likely used her last ounce of strength to pull the wagon to this spot, hoping someone would find them. She had given her last water, her last food, to her daughter. It was an act of sacrifice so profound, so absolute, that it brought a lump to Elias's throat. He knelt by the side of the wagon, the rough wood pressing into his knees, a wave of profound, unexpected grief washing over him. Grief for this brave, unknown woman. Grief for the orphan child she had left behind. He was a man who had fled from the ghosts of his own lost family, only to be confronted by the fresh, raw tragedy of another's 2024. He spoke to the little girl, his voice a rough, gentle whisper, asking her name, trying to coax her out into the light. She did not speak. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering, her tiny hand resting protectively on her mother's still form. Elias knew then that he could not leave. He could not ride away. Fate, in its own cruel and mysterious way, had just handed him a new, heartbreaking mission. Elias knew he had to get the child out of the wagon, away from the cold reality of her mother's death. He reached in, his movements slow and gentle, his heart aching with a tenderness he hadn't felt in 5 long years. He spoke to her in a low, soothing murmur, the way he used to speak to his own daughter in the brief, happy lifetime before the fire. He told her it was all right, that he wouldn't hurt her, that he was there to help. The little girl, Lily, watched him, her solemn gaze unwavering. As he carefully lifted her small, thin body, he felt a small, hard object press against his hand. It was hanging from a thin chain around her neck, tucked beneath the collar of her simple dress. He gently drew it out into the light. It was a locket. A small, silver locket, tarnished by time and travel, with a familiar, intricate design of a soaring eagle etched onto its surface. Time stopped. The air grew thick, heavy. The sound of the wind, the cry of a distant hawk, the beating of his own heart, it all faded away into a deafening silence. His hand began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that shook his entire body. He had bought that locket at a trading post in St. Louis. He had spent his last dollar on it. It was a wedding gift for his wife, Sarah. His fingers, suddenly clumsy and numb, fumbled with the clasp. It felt as if he were moving through water, every second stretching into an eternity. He opened it. This was the plot twist, the revelation that shattered his world and pieced it back together in a single, agonizing instant. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded portrait of his own younger, smiling face, a man full of a hope he no longer recognized. And on the other, a portrait of his beloved Sarah, her eyes shining with the love that had been the anchor of his life. He stared at the images, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. It was impossible. It was a cruel dream, a ghost story spun from his own grief. Sarah had died. He had seen the homestead burn. He had buried what little he could find, and then he looked, truly looked, at the little girl's face. He saw her mother's dark, soulful eyes, her determined chin, and beneath the dirt and the exhaustion, he saw the unmistakable shape of his own nose, the same stubborn set of his jaw that he saw in his reflection every morning. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, animalistic cry of a pain so deep it had been buried for 5 years, a sound of both heartbreak and a terrifying, impossible hope. He collapsed against the side of the wagon, the world dissolving into a blur of tears. He was not looking at an orphan. He was looking at his daughter, Lily, the child he had held in his heart as a dream, the child he had mourned, the child he believed had perished with her mother in the flames. She was alive. Sarah had somehow survived. She had escaped the raid, had given birth to their daughter alone in the wilderness, and had spent 5 long, impossible years trying to find her way to safety, a journey that had tragically ended just as it was about to be completed. The lullaby he had heard on the wind was not just a familiar tune. It was a message from the ghost of his wife, a song of love sent across the veil of death, carried on by their child. The lonely cowboy, the man who had thought he had nothing left to live for, had just been given back everything. He wept, his body shaking with great, racking sobs, until the little girl, his daughter, Lily, who had been watching him with a strange, quiet understanding, cautiously reached out a small hand and placed it on his heaving shoulder, a silent, comforting touch that anchored him back to the living world. The world slowly came back into focus for Elias Thorne. The initial, violent storm of his grief subsided, leaving a deep, profound ache in its wake. He was a father again. The thought was both a miracle and a terrifying, crushing weight. He held the small, silent girl in his arms, his daughter, a stranger he had mourned for 5 years. He looked at her, searching for traces of Sarah in her small face, his heart a tangled knot of joy and sorrow. He knew he couldn't leave Sarah's body in the wagon. She deserved a proper resting place, a place of peace after her long, arduous journey. As he gently began to prepare her for burial, his hands still trembling, he found it tucked beneath the blankets where she had lain. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages warped by damp and time. It was her diary. That night, by the flickering light of a small campfire, with his daughter finally asleep in his bedroll, Elias opened the book. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's refall, though it grew weaker and more spidery towards the end. And as he read, the last 5 years of her life, a story of impossible courage and unwavering love, unfolded before him. The diary began on the day after the raid. She wrote of waking in a ditch, wounded and disoriented, the smoldering ruins of their home a dark scar on the horizon. She had survived only because she had been thrown clear by the blast. She wrote of her desperate, frantic search for him, calling his name until her voice was raw, finding nothing but ashes and silence. Believing he was dead, her grief was a black, bottomless pit. But she was not alone. She had their unborn child, a tiny, secret spark of life that gave her a reason to keep going. He read of her incredible journey, how she had been found and cared for by a small, peaceful tribe of Ute who had helped her through the difficult birth of their daughter, Lily. She wrote of the great black horse, Guardian, the only other survivor from their ranch, who had found her in the wilderness and had refused to leave her side. His presence a comforting link to the life she had lost. For 5 years, she had lived with the Ute, raising Lily, teaching her the songs and stories of her own childhood. But her heart always yearned for a place to call home, a place to build a future for their daughter. When she heard of a growing, peaceful settlement to the west, she had made the difficult decision to leave the safety of the tribe. With her few possessions, her daughter, and the ever-faithful Guardian, she had set out on her final journey, a journey to find a new beginning, a journey that had tragically ended just miles from a civilization that could have saved her. The last entry was written in a faint, trembling scrawl, dated just 2 days prior. "The fever is taking me. I am so tired. But I am not afraid. I look at my Lily, and I see your strength, my love. I see your courage. I am leaving her in the care of the only other soul I trust in this world, Guardian. He is a good, strong horse. He knows the way. He will protect her. Whoever finds this, please, care for my daughter. Tell her her father was a hero. Tell her I love her." Elias closed the diary, the leather cool against his skin. The tears that fell were not of grief, but of a profound, heartbreaking pride for the incredible woman he had married. She had not been a victim. She had been a survivor, a warrior, a mother who had fought until her very last breath for their child. He now understood the horse's impossible mission, its unwavering loyalty. It was not just instinct, it was the fulfillment of a final promise to its mistress. The weight of that promise now rested squarely on his shoulders. The dawn that followed was gray and cold. Elias spent the morning digging a grave on a small, quiet hill overlooking the vast prairie, a place where the morning sun would touch first. He worked with a grim, focused energy, each shovelful a final act of devotion to the woman he had loved and lost twice. Lily, his daughter, sat nearby, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching him with her solemn, knowing eyes. She did not cry. She seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment, the sacred duty her father was performing. He wrapped Sarah's body in the finest of her blankets and laid her to rest. There was no preacher, no eulogy, just the quiet words of a heartbroken husband whispered into the wind. He spoke to her, telling her he had found them, that he was sorry he hadn't been there, that he would protect their daughter with his life. As he placed the final stone on her grave, he looked over at his daughter, Lily, and at the great black horse, Guardian, who stood a few feet away like a silent mourning statue. In that moment, the aimless, wandering ghost that was Elias Thorne died, and in his place a father was born. He walked over to Lily, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. He saw the fear and uncertainty warring with the quiet strength in her gaze. He knew he was a stranger to her, a rough, bearded man who had appeared at the end of her world. He had to build a bridge across the 5 years of silence that separated them. "Your mother was the bravest person I have ever known, and she left me the most precious gift in the world. She left me you." He then stood and walked to the horse. He placed a hand on Guardian's powerful neck, looking into the animal's intelligent, dark eyes. "And she left me you, old friend. You kept your promise to her. Now, I will make my promise to you both." He turned to face the grave of his wife, his daughter at his side, his hand resting on the loyal horse. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man standing to face his future. He made a vow, not just to the spirit of his wife, but to himself, to his daughter, and to the horse that had reunited them. He swore he would no longer wander. He would build them a home. He would be the father Lily deserved, a man of strength, patience, and unwavering love. And he would honor the loyalty of Guardian, giving him a life of peace and green pastures for the rest of his days. The weight of his grief had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer an anchor, dragging him down into despair. It was now a foundation, a solid ground upon which he would build their new life. His new purpose was clear. His journey was no longer one of escape. It was a journey home. A vow, however solemn, is only a collection of words. The true test lay in the journey ahead. After the simple burial, Elias faced his first challenge as a father. What to do next? He was a stranger to this small girl, and she to him. The chasm of 5 lost years was a vast, silent wilderness between them. His first attempts at connection were clumsy, born of a rusty, long-forgotten paternal instinct. He tried to ask her questions about her life, about her mother, but Lily would only respond with a shy nod or a shake of her head. The grief was too fresh, the man before her too new. He felt a familiar frustration rising, the impatience of a soldier who wanted to fix a problem, but he quickly swallowed it down. He remembered his vow. Patience. He would have to earn her trust, one small step at a time. Their journey began, not towards a specific destination, but simply away from this place of sorrow. He placed Lily in the front of the wagon, Guardian now harnessed and pulling with a new, lighter energy. Elias walked beside the wagon, his hand resting on the seat next to his daughter, a silent, protective presence. The first few days were a study in quiet observation. He learned the small things about her. He learned she was afraid of the dark, her small body tensing as the sun went down. So, he made sure their campfire was always bright and warm, and he would sit up, rifle across his lap, a silent guardian against the night's imagined monsters, until he was sure she was asleep. He learned she didn't like the taste of dried jerky, so he spent an entire afternoon hunting until he could provide her with a proper meal of roasted quail. It was Guardian, the great black horse, who became the bridge between them. Lily adored the animal that had been her protector for so long. She would talk to him in a soft, continuous stream of whispers, sharing secrets Elias was not yet privy to. Elias, seeing this, began to use the horse as their common language. He would show her how to brush Guardian's long, black coat, placing the brush in her small hand and guiding it with his own. He taught her the names of the different parts of the harness, his voice patient and steady. He would lift her onto the horse's broad, strong back and lead them in slow, careful circles around their camp. In these moments, sharing in their mutual love for this magnificent creature, the walls around Lily's heart began to crumble. The first real breakthrough came on the 4th night of their journey. A cold wind had swept down from the mountains. As Elias sat by the fire, he watched Lily shiver in her thin blanket. He took off his own heavy, wool-lined cavalry coat, a relic from his past life, and walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He simply draped the massive coat over her small shoulders. She disappeared inside its folds, only her small face visible. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw not just solemnity, but a flicker of a shy, grateful smile. And then, she spoke her first, full sentence to him, her voice a small, sleepy whisper. "It smells like you, like campfire and pine trees." The simple, innocent words struck Elias with a force that left him breathless. It was not just an observation, it was an acceptance. He was no longer just a stranger. He was a scent, a presence, a beginning of what it meant to be father. He sat back down by the fire, his heart filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that they were going to be all right. After 2 weeks of travel, their slow, healing journey brought them to the edge of a small, quiet town nestled in a green, fertile valley. It was a place called Havens Point. For Elias, a man long accustomed to the harshness of the trail, the sight of smoke curling from chimneys and the distant sound of a church bell was both a comfort and a source of deep anxiety. Rejoining the world of men meant facing questions, facing judgment. Their arrival, as expected, drew stares. The sight of the rough, bearded man, the small, solemn girl, and the giant, magnificent horse was a curiosity. The final confrontation for Elias Thorne was not one of bullets or fists, but a quiet, internal battle against his own desire to flee, to retreat back into the familiar solitude of the wilderness. He walked into the general store, his daughter's small hand held tightly in his. The storekeeper looked at them, his eyes filled with a cautious curiosity. Elias, for the first time in 5 years, did not just buy supplies and leave. He told his story. Or rather, he told Sarah's story. He spoke of his wife's incredible courage, of his daughter's miraculous survival, and of the unwavering loyalty of the horse that had saved her. He showed the storekeeper the locket, the undeniable proof of his tale. The story, so incredible, so heartbreaking, spread through the small town like a warm, gentle fire. People, drawn not by morbid curiosity, but by a genuine, heartfelt compassion, came to offer their help. The blacksmith offered to repair his wagon. The doctor's wife offered a room for Lily, filled with dolls and warm clothes. The community of Havens Point, in its simple, honest way, opened its arms to the broken family. This was the final confrontation. Elias had faced the ghosts of his past and the judgment of the present, and he had been met not with suspicion, but with kindness. He had found his safe harbor. 5 years later, Elias Thorne was no longer a wanderer. He was a homesteader, a respected member of the Havens Point community. Using the last of his cavalry pay, he had bought a small plot of land and, with his own 2 hands, had built a home. A real home, with a bright kitchen window for the morning sun and a porch for watching the sunset. Lily, no longer a silent, solemn child, was a bright, laughing 10-year-old, her mother's spirit shining in her eyes. She was a child of 2 worlds, with her father's quiet strength and her mother's gentle empathy. And Guardian, the great black horse, lived out the rest of his days in a lush, green pasture, a beloved and legendary member of their family. One warm summer evening, Elias and Lily sat on their porch, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. "Papa, do you think Mama can see us?" "I know she can. She's in the song of the crickets, the warmth of the setting sun, and she's in the heart of that old horse who never gave up. She's right here." Elias looked out at the peaceful valley, his heart full. He had not just found his daughter, he had found his way back to himself. The long, lonely journey was over. The lonely cowboy, the grieving husband, the haunted soldier, they were all ghosts now. In their place stood a father, a neighbor, a man at peace. He had finally come home.